What happens when a Hollywood star known for speaking his mind sits down at a daytime talk show table and suddenly decides he's not going to play along with the usual friendly interview? Make sure to subscribe to Final Take Files, and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The studio lights are bright, the audience is already warmed up, and the conversation at the table starts off exactly the way viewers expect. Everyone is smiling. The hosts are relaxed. It's supposed to be another easy celebrity interview. Whoopi leans slightly forward at the table, glancing at the camera with a grin. "All right, everybody, we're back," she says, her voice calm but energetic. "Our next guest is an Academy Award winner, director, actor, and someone who's been in a lot of headlines lately. Please welcome Ben Affleck." The audience bursts into applause as Ben walks out, waving politely, giving a quick smile before sitting down at the table. Sara Haines leans in with that familiar upbeat energy. "Ben, thank you for being here." "Thanks for having me," Ben replies, nodding toward the hosts. Sunny Hostin adds, "You've been busy. New projects, producing, directing. Do you ever sleep?" Ben chuckles lightly. "Sometimes. When my kids let me." The audience laughs softly. Everything feels normal so far. Sara jumps back in. "So let's start with the new film. People are really excited about it, and the early reviews are strong." Ben nods. "Yeah, it's been a lot of work, but I'm proud of it." For the next minute or so, the conversation stays smooth. Ben talks about directing, about working with younger actors, about how Hollywood has changed since he started. The audience claps a few times as the hosts react positively. But then the tone begins to shift. Sara tilts her head slightly and glances at her notes. "Ben," she says, "you've also been pretty outspoken lately about media coverage and how celebrities are treated. Some people say you've been a little defensive." A few people in the audience murmur quietly. Ben's expression changes just slightly. Not angry, just more serious. "Well," he says calmly, "I think sometimes the coverage can be unfair." Sara nods quickly. "Sure, but critics say celebrities often blame the media when the real issue might be their own behavior." Whoopi glances over at Sara briefly, sensing the shift. Ben pauses. For a moment the table is quiet. He folds his hands together and looks directly at Sara. "I think that's a pretty convenient narrative," he says. The audience goes quiet. Sara keeps smiling, but it's a slightly tighter smile now. "What do you mean by that?" she asks. Ben leans back slightly in his chair. "I mean," he says slowly, "that sometimes people on shows like this talk about celebrities as if we're not actual people." A few audience members react with a quiet, "Oh." Sunny raises her eyebrows slightly. Sara laughs lightly, trying to keep the mood relaxed. "Well, I promise we see you as a person," she says. Ben nods once. "Sometimes," he replies. Whoopi quickly jumps in. All right, let's not start a war yet," she jokes, trying to keep the conversation light. The audience laughs nervously. But Sara decides to push a little further. "Ben, I'm curious," she says. "Because some viewers feel that when public figures criticize media or talk shows, it can come across as avoiding accountability." Ben looks directly at her again. "No," he says calmly. "Accountability is fair. But assumptions aren't." The audience grows quieter now. Sara crosses her arms slightly on the table. "So are you saying we make assumptions here?" Ben doesn't hesitate. "Sometimes, yeah." A few audience members clap suddenly. Others gasp. Whoopi turns toward Ben with a half-smile. "Well now," she says, "this just got interesting." Sara laughs again, but there's tension behind it now. "Okay," she says. "That's a big statement." Ben shrugs lightly. "Just being honest." Sara looks at him carefully. "Can you give an example?" The audience leans forward. Ben takes a breath. "Well," he says, "I've watched this show before." The crowd laughs a little. "And sometimes," he continues, "a guest comes on, and before they even sit down, the conversation already has a direction." Sunny tilts her head. "You mean like we've already decided something about them?" Ben nods. "Exactly." Sara looks slightly surprised. "Are you saying we did that with you?" Ben pauses. Just long enough to make the room uncomfortable. I think you might be trying to right now. The audience gasps. Someone in the crowd claps loudly. Sara blinks. Wait, hold on, she says quickly. I asked a question. Ben nods. And I answered it. Whoopi raises both hands slightly. Okay, she says. Let's slow this down. But the tension is already there. Sara leans forward now. Ben, with respect, asking questions is literally our job. Ben smiles faintly. I know. But you're suggesting there's some kind of bias here. Ben nods again. I'm suggesting that sometimes the tone changes depending on who's sitting here. The audience murmurs again. Sunny looks intrigued now. Interesting, she says quietly. Sara glances at Whoopi. Then back at Ben. So let me ask you directly, she says. Do you think we're treating you unfairly right now? The audience becomes completely silent. Ben looks around the table. Then back at Sara. I think, he says slowly, you're trying to steer this conversation somewhere that has nothing to do with why I'm here. The audience reacts instantly. A mix of claps and shocked murmurs. Sara's eyes widen slightly. Wow, she says. Whoopi leans back in her chair. Well, all right then. The tension in the room is now unmistakable. Sara taps her pen lightly on the table. Ben, she says, this is a talk show. Conversations go in different directions. Ben nods calmly. Sure, he says. But sometimes those directions feel intentional. The audience reacts again. Sara exhales. So now we're intentional? Ben shrugs. You asked. The crowd laughs nervously. Whoopi shakes her head slightly. This is live television, folks, she says. Sara sits up straighter. All right, she says. Let's talk about it then. Ben looks at her calmly. I thought we already were. And suddenly the energy at the table feels completely different. The friendly interview is gone. Now it feels like a real debate. And the audience can sense it. The room grows quieter as Sara leans forward again, clearly not backing down. Well, Ben, she says, if we're being honest. And that's when the conversation takes a turn that nobody in the studio expected. Sara pauses for a second, then looks directly at Ben. Well, Ben, she says slowly, if we're being honest, I think it's a little unfair to come on a talk show and assume the hosts are trying to trap you. The audience makes a small reacting murmur. Ben stays calm, but he's clearly focused now. I didn't say trap, he replies. Sara lifts her eyebrows slightly. You said intentional. Ben nods. Right. And there's a difference. Sunny leans in, clearly interested in where this is going. Explain that difference, she says. Ben turns slightly toward her. Intentional means sometimes the conversation is framed in a certain way before the guest even speaks. Sara shakes her head lightly. But framing questions is part of interviewing. Ben nods again. Sure. But sometimes the framing becomes the story instead of the answer. A few audience members clap softly. Whoopi looks at the crowd and laughs. Okay, hold on, she says. We're not going to have the audience judging every sentence here. The crowd laughs. Sara takes a breath. Ben, I'm trying to understand what you're suggesting. Because from where I'm sitting, we're having a conversation. Ben tilts his head slightly. Are we? That gets another reaction from the audience. Sara exhales a small laugh. Yes, we are. But earlier, Ben continues calmly, you mentioned criticism about celebrities being defensive. Sara nods. Because that's part of the public conversation. But it wasn't about the film, Ben says. The audience goes quiet again. Sunny glances down at the notes on the table. That's actually fair, she says carefully. We did pivot pretty quickly. Sara looks at Sunny for a moment, slightly surprised. Well, the audience cares about more than just the project, Sara replies. Ben smiles faintly. I understand that. I've been doing interviews for 30 years. Whoopi leans forward with a grin. And surviving them too, she says. The audience laughs. But Sara isn't laughing as much now. Ben, she says, This show talks about culture, media, politics, entertainment. That's what our viewers expect. Ben nods slowly. I get that. But sometimes the way the questions come out feels less like curiosity and more like judgment. That line gets a loud reaction from the audience. Sara immediately responds. Judgment? That's a strong word. Ben shrugs slightly. It's an honest one. Sunny raises her eyebrows again. Can I jump in for a second? She asks. Whoopi gestures toward her. Please. Sunny turns to Ben. I'm curious if you think talk shows in general treat celebrities unfairly, or if there's something specific about this format. Ben thinks for a moment. Well, I think sometimes there's pressure to create a moment. The audience murmurs again. Sara tilts her head. A moment. Ben nods. Something that trends. Something that goes viral. A few audience members clap. Sara shakes her head quickly. Okay, hold on, she says. You're basically saying we're trying to create drama. Ben doesn't answer immediately, which somehow says more than if he had. The audience reacts again. Whoopi laughs out loud. Oh boy. Sara leans forward again, clearly not backing down. Ben, if we wanted drama, we wouldn't invite guests we respect. Ben looks at her calmly. Then why start the conversation about criticism instead of the work? The audience goes silent again. Sara opens her mouth, then pauses. Sunny glances toward Whoopi. Whoopi lifts her hands slightly. Don't look at me. The audience laughs nervously. Sara gathers her thoughts. Because, she says carefully, you've been in the news lately. Viewers are curious. Ben nods slowly. But the news doesn't always equal the truth. A few audience members clap again. Sara sighs softly. Ben, with respect, you're a public figure. Public figures get talked about. I agree, Ben replies. But sometimes it feels like the talking becomes the focus instead of the reality. Sunny leans forward again. So what's the reality from your perspective? Ben pauses for a moment before answering. The reality is most of the time I'm working, raising my kids, and trying to stay out of headlines. The audience laughs a little. Whoopi nods. That part one believe, she says. But Sara still looks unconvinced. Ben, come on, she says. You know Hollywood works. Publicity, interviews, headlines, it's part of the ecosystem. Ben smiles slightly. Sure. But there's a difference between publicity and speculation. The audience reacts again. Sara taps her pen on the table. So you think we're speculating? Ben looks at her directly. I think sometimes the conversation gets shaped by narratives that already exist. Sunny nods slowly. That actually happens in media a lot, she says. Sara turns to Sunny. So now we're the villains? Sunny laughs. No one said villains. Whoopi jumps in quickly. Let's not turn this into a courtroom. The audience laughs again. But the tension hasn't really gone away. Sara leans back in her chair slightly. Ben, I'm just trying to figure out why you seem defensive about a pretty normal question. Ben raises his eyebrows. See, that's exactly what I mean. The audience reacts immediately. Sara blinks. What? You asked about criticism, Ben says calmly. I explained my perspective. And now it becomes defensive. The audience claps louder this time. Sara's smile tightens again. Well, if the shoe fits. Whoopi immediately cuts in. Okay, she says, laughing but also trying to keep control of the table. The crowd erupts in noise. Some people clap. Others gasp. Sunny looks back and forth between them. Ben stays calm, but he's clearly not backing down now. See, that's interesting, he says. Sara looks at him sharply. What is? That line, Ben replies. What line? If the shoe fits. The audience reacts again. Sara shrugs. It's a common phrase. Ben nods. But it also assumes something. Sunny leans forward again, intrigued. This is turning into a media studies class. The audience laughs. Ben smiles slightly. Maybe it should. Sara folds her arms lightly. So what are you saying, Ben? That we're proving your point. Ben looks around the table. Then back at her. I think the audience can decide that. The crowd immediately reacts with loud applause. Whoopi shakes her head, smiling. Oh man. Sara looks toward the audience, then back at Ben. Well, congratulations, she says. You've got them on your side. Ben shrugs lightly. That wasn't the goal. Then what was? Sara asks. Ben pauses for a moment. Then he answers calmly. Just honesty. The studio becomes quiet again. And now the conversation has clearly moved past a simple interview. What started as a promotional segment has turned into something much bigger. A debate about media, perception, and accountability happening live on television. Sunny glances toward the producers off camera. Whoopi notices. Oh yeah, she says with a grin. The control room is definitely sweating right now. The audience laughs loudly. But Sara still looks determined. All right, she says, leaning forward again. If we're being honest. And the way she says it makes it clear the discussion is about to escalate even further. Sara leans forward again, clearly not ready to let the conversation end there. All right, she says, looking directly at Ben. If we're being honest, you came here knowing what this show is. Ben nods calmly. Of course. So why act surprised when we ask real questions? A quiet murmur spreads through the audience. Ben keeps his tone steady. I'm not surprised by questions. I'm surprised by assumptions. Sara shakes her head slightly. You keep saying that, but I still don't see where the assumption is. Sunny jumps in before Ben can answer. I think what he's saying, she says carefully, is that sometimes the framing of the question already carries a judgment. Sara turns toward Sunny. But every question has context. Ben nods. That's true. Then he looks back at Sara. But context and narrative aren't always the same thing. The audience reacts again with a few claps. Whoopi leans back in her chair and laughs softly. I feel like we just wandered into a media philosophy debate. The crowd laughs. Sara exhales and glances toward the audience. Look, I'm not trying to attack you, Ben, she says. But when public figures say the media is unfair, it sounds like they just don't like criticism. Ben shakes his head. Criticism is fine, he says. It's part of the job. Then what's the issue? Sara asks. The issue, Ben replies, is when criticism turns into a story that keeps repeating whether it's accurate or not. The audience gets quiet again. Sunny nods slowly. That happens more than people realize, she says. Sara looks unconvinced. So are you saying the media just makes things up? Ben raises his hand slightly. No. I'm saying the conversation can become bigger than the facts. Whoopi points toward Ben jokingly. That actually happens in politics a lot too. The audience laughs loudly. Sara smiles for a moment, but then leans forward again. Okay, she says. Let me ask you something simple. Ben nods. Do you think we've treated you unfairly today? The room goes completely quiet. Ben pauses for a second. Then he answers calmly. I think the conversation shifted away from why I'm here. The audience reacts again. Sara sighs lightly. So you're saying we should just promote the movie and not ask anything else? Ben shakes his head. No. I'm saying conversations work better when both sides are actually listening. That line gets loud applause. Whoopi claps her hands once on the table. All right. That's a good point. Sunny nods. Fair. Sara sits back for a moment, thinking. Then she looks back at Ben. Well, she says, I think viewers at home are definitely listening right now. The audience laughs. But the tension at the table is still there. And it's clear this discussion has gone much further than anyone expected when the segment started. The segment wraps up, but the tension lingers. Sara leans back, smiling tightly. All right, Ben, I think we get your point. Ben nods calmly. Glad we could be honest. The audience claps, some cheering, some murmuring in surprise. Social media lights up instantly. Clips of the exchange go viral. Tweets debate whether Ben was right, whether Sara was fair, and whether the show crossed a line. Backstage, producers are buzzing, replaying the moment, realizing this was bigger than a simple promo. Fans discuss it for hours online. Talk shows cite it the next day. Headlines read, Ben Affleck calls out The View. Audience goes silent. Whoopi laughs lightly, shaking her head. Well, that escalated. Sara exhales. Live television, folks. Anything can happen. Ben smiles politely and waves as the cameras fade out. Make sure to share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Final Take Files for more real talk show stories.